I found a secret list my husband wrote about me, hidden away in his desk drawer. As my eyes scanned the words, my heart stopped, and my entire world collapsed. This single piece of paper was surely the end of our marriage. My breath hitched in my throat, a silent gasp trapped behind a sudden, sharp pressure in my chest. This was it, the confirmation of every fear I'd harbored in the dark, quiet corners of my mind. A list, a tally of my flaws, a secret inventory of my imperfections, a documented case for why he was so distant, so tired, so ready to leave. My fingers tightened around the paper, the edges digging into my skin, a small, grounding pain in the swirling vortex of my emotions. The air in his study suddenly felt thick and suffocating, each breath a conscious effort. I stumbled backwards into his chair, the crumpled paper clutched in my fist, my gaze fixed on the handwritten words that had just detonated my life. But how on earth did I get here, to this moment of quiet devastation in the sunlit dust motes of his study? How did a simple piece of paper come to hold such power over me? Perhaps it's best to go back, to unravel the thread from the very beginning. Mark and I met in the most unremarkable way possible, at a coffee shop. It was a Tuesday. I was rushing, catastrophically late for a meeting, juggling a precarious stack of editorial proofs and a lukewarm latte. He was standing in line, his brow furrowed in concentration as he scrolled through something on his phone. Our collision was inevitable, a small, clattering disaster of spilled coffee and scattered paper. A mumbled, mortified apology escaped my lips as I dropped to the floor to gather the ink-stained sheets. He was surprisingly good-natured about the whole thing, a small smile touching his lips as he helped me collect my mess, his large hands carefully separating pages that had stuck together. We exchanged a few polite, hurried words, the kind reserved for strangers during minor inconveniences, and then went our separate ways. Or so I thought. A week later, I saw him again at the same coffee shop. This time, I wasn't in a rush. I was meeting a friend who was, predictably, running late. I sat nursing a pastry and a book, lost in a fictional world. He walked past my table, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. He hesitated for a moment, a brief internal debate, before turning back. He asked if the seat across from me was taken. It wasn't. My friend never showed up, but Mark and I talked for 3 hours that afternoon, about everything and nothing. I learned he was an architect, that he found beauty in structure and form. He learned I was an editor, lost in the world of words and narratives. There was an easygoing quality to our conversation, a comfortable silence that fell between us at times, never awkward, always peaceful. I found myself telling him things I rarely shared, about my dream of one day writing my own novel, a confession that usually felt too vulnerable to voice aloud. He didn't dismiss it. He asked what it would be about. Over the next few weeks, our paths kept crossing with an almost comical frequency. It felt serendipitous, like the universe was nudging us together. We started meeting intentionally for coffee, then for dinner. He had a quiet charm, a gentle, steady way about him that was the complete antithesis of the loud, attention-seeking men I'd dated before. He listened. It sounds simple, but it was profound. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. I had been in relationships before, but this felt different. There was a depth to our connection, a sense of being understood on a fundamental level that I hadn't experienced before. Falling in love with Mark was a slow, gradual process, like the unfolding of a flower in time-lapse. It wasn't a dramatic, whirlwind romance filled with grand cinematic gestures. It was a steady, comforting warmth that grew stronger with each passing day. It was in the way he'd remember a tiny detail from a story I'd told him weeks before, or the way he'd text me a picture of a building with an interesting facade because he thought I'd appreciate the design. He appreciated my quirks, the way I would get completely lost in thought, the way I always had a book within arm's reach, my habit of organizing my own bookshelf by color instead of author. He never tried to change me, but instead seemed to celebrate the very essence of who I was. There were moments, of course, when my own long-held insecurities would creep in, like weeds through pavement cracks. I had always struggled with a persistent self-doubt, a nagging voice in the back of my mind that whispered I wasn't good enough, smart enough, interesting enough. Sometimes I would look at Mark, so kind, so intelligent, so genuinely good, and wonder what on earth he saw in me. I felt plain next to him. His world of blueprints and angles and tangible creation seemed so much more important than my world of commas and character arcs. These doubts were usually fleeting, chased away by his reassuring smile or a gentle touch on the small of my back, but they always lurked beneath the surface. As our relationship deepened, the idea of a future together began to take shape, not as a question, but as a quiet, foregone conclusion. The day Mark proposed was simple and perfect, a reflection of the man he was. We were at home, in the small apartment we had just started sharing, making dinner together. It was a rainy Saturday, and we were attempting a complicated lasagna recipe from a cookbook he'd bought me. Flour dusted my cheek, and I was complaining about the sauce not thickening when he just stopped what he was doing. He turned to me, a small velvet box in his hand, and asked me to marry him. There were no grand gestures, no flash mob, no elaborate speeches, just a heartfelt question and a look in his eyes that held our entire future. I said yes, of course, tears of pure joy streaming down my face, mingling with the flour. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair in a restored barn upstate, surrounded by our closest friends and family. It was a day filled with love, laughter, and a sense of overwhelming, bone-deep happiness. Standing at the makeshift altar, holding Mark's steady hand, that nagging voice of insecurity was finally silent. I felt for once completely and utterly worthy. The first few years of our marriage were a blur of ordinary bliss. We navigated the ups and downs of daily life, the small disagreements over whose turn it was to do the dishes, the quiet moments of connection that made it all worthwhile. We built traditions, like Sunday morning pancakes and Friday night movie marathons. We created a comfortable rhythm, a shared language of inside jokes and knowing glances. But life, as it always does, threw us its share of curveballs. Mark's firm went through a difficult period, and the stress he carried home was a heavy, unspoken presence in our apartment. My mother got sick, and the months of hospital visits and worried phone calls took a toll on both of us. These were challenging times when our resilience as a couple was tested. But through it all, we leaned on each other, supported each other, and always emerged stronger on the other side. Or so I thought. The truth is, during those hard times, my old insecurities began to resurface, stronger than before. When Mark was stressed and quiet, I didn't see a man burdened by work. I saw a man withdrawing from me. I interpreted his exhaustion as disinterest. I started to feel like I wasn't enough to make him happy, that my presence wasn't a comfort, but just another responsibility. A few years into our marriage, for our 4th anniversary, I decided I wanted to do something special, something grand. I wanted to reignite a spark I feared was dimming. I spent weeks planning a surprise dinner. I booked a table at the fanciest restaurant in the city, the kind with a 6-month waiting list. I bought a new dress, spent a fortune on hair and makeup, and meticulously arranged for a car to pick him up from his office. I imagined his shocked, delighted face, the way he would sweep me into his arms and tell me how amazing I was. The reality was different. He arrived at the restaurant looking utterly exhausted. A massive project deadline had been moved up, and he had been working 70-hour weeks. He was appreciative, of course. He said all the right things, but his smiles were strained, and his eyes were distant. He was physically present, but his mind was clearly back at the office, wrestling with structural load calculations. I spent the entire dinner feeling like a failure. My grand gesture had fallen flat. I saw his polite fatigue not as a product of his demanding job, but as a reflection of his feelings for me. Driving home in silence, I felt a familiar, cold dread settle in my stomach. I was boring him. Our marriage was becoming boring. This feeling compounded over time. At parties with his work colleagues, I often felt like an outsider. They would all talk about projects and architectural theory, a language I didn't speak. I would try to join in, but my comments felt flimsy and unintelligent. I would retreat into myself, nursing a glass of wine in a corner, watching Mark move through the room with an easy confidence. I saw him laughing with a beautiful, sharp-witted colleague, and my heart would ache with a jealousy that felt both childish and consuming. Later in the car, I would ask, "Were you embarrassed by me tonight?" He would look at me, genuinely bewildered. "What?" No, of course not. Why would you ever think that? He would tell me he was proud of me, that his friends thought I was lovely. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was just being kind, that I was a liability in his sophisticated world. The lowest point came about a year ago. The publishing house where I worked went through a massive restructuring, and my position was eliminated. I was devastated. My job wasn't just a job, it was a core part of my identity. Losing it felt like losing a piece of myself. Mark was my rock during that time, but we spoke different languages of support. He was practical. He updated our budget, assured me we would be fine financially, and encouraged me to take some time for myself before starting the job hunt. He took over the cooking, handled the bills, and tried to shield me from any extra stress. But what I craved was not practicality. I craved emotional reassurance. I wanted him to sit with me and tell me that I was brilliant and talented, that any company would be lucky to have me. I wanted him to validate my worth outside of my professional achievements. When he said, "Don't worry about the money, we'll manage," what I heard was, "Your only value was your paycheck, and now that's gone, but at least we're not broke." It was a cruel, unfair interpretation, a product of my own fear-warped mind, but I couldn't help it. I felt like a burden, adrift and untethered, and I believed he saw me that way too. The weeks leading up to my discovery of the list were particularly strained. We had a small, stupid argument about something I can't even remember now. Laundry, I think. But it blew up into something much bigger. I accused him of being distant, of not caring. He, looking utterly weary, said he didn't know what I wanted from him. I went to bed that night with a deep, aching loneliness, convinced that we were two ships passing in the night, living in the same house, but in completely different worlds. I thought, he doesn't see me anymore. He doesn't even see me. That's why I was in his study a few days later. It was a Saturday morning, and he was out running errands. The room, usually his sanctuary, felt foreign and messy. I started tidying up, a desperate attempt to impose some order on the chaos I felt inside. I stacked loose papers, arranged his pens, and dusted the shelves. That's when I saw it, tucked inside a worn moleskin notebook he used for rough sketches. A single piece of paper, folded into a neat square. My heart pounded as I unfolded it, my mind bracing for the final, documented blow to our marriage. And then I saw the title. It was not what I expected. It wasn't "Reasons I'm Unhappy" or "Things That Need to Change." Written in his familiar, slightly slanted script were 6 words that stopped the world from spinning. "Little things Clara does that make me smile." I sank into his worn leather office chair, the paper trembling in my hand. The tears that came were not of sorrow, but of profound, earth-shattering shock. This wasn't a list of my flaws. It was the opposite. I read the first line, my vision blurred. 1. The way she hums to herself when she's concentrating on a book. I remembered, with a jolt, just last week, I'd been reading on the couch, completely engrossed. I'd started humming, a mindless, tuneless sound I make when I'm deep in thought. I'd caught myself and stopped, embarrassed, glancing over at him. He'd been watching me from his armchair, and I'd interpreted his quiet gaze as annoyance. But he hadn't been annoyed. He had been smiling. My eyes scanned down the page, each entry a small, precise incision into the heart of my insecurity. 2. Her little happy dance in the kitchen when a song she loves comes on the radio. That was me. A silly, uncoordinated wiggle that I only ever did when I thought he wasn't looking. He had seen it. He had seen it, and it had made him happy. 3. How she gets so mad at fictional characters and argues with the TV. I thought of all the times I'd yelled at the screen during a movie, utterly invested. He would just shake his head and laugh quietly. I thought he was laughing at me, at my childish inability to separate fiction from reality. But he had been laughing with a fondness that I had been completely blind to. The list went on, each point dismantling a carefully constructed brick in the wall of my self-doubt. 4. The way she bites her lip when she's trying to decide on what to order at a restaurant. 5. How she always makes sure I have my favorite dark chocolate in the pantry, even though she hates it. This one hit me hard. I saw it as a simple grocery chore, an automatic addition to the shopping list. I never thought of it as an act of love. But he did. For him, it was a small, consistent signal that I was thinking of him, that I cared about his small happinesses. My grand anniversary gesture had been a failure, but this tiny, repeated act of stocking chocolate was, in his eyes, a success. 6. The slightly wrinkled spot between her eyebrows when she's proofreading. 7. How she saves the last bite of her dessert for me every single time. 8. The way her eyes light up when she talks about a book she's passionate about. It's like a switch is flipped. I remembered the parties, the ones where I felt so inadequate. I would inevitably find one other person who loved to read, and we'd end up in a corner, talking animatedly for hours about novels and authors. I thought Mark saw this as me being antisocial, hiding from his important friends, but he saw it as a switch being flipped. He saw me come alive. He wasn't embarrassed, he was captivated. 9. Her unwavering kindness to strangers, especially elderly people. 10. The sound of her laugh when she's genuinely amused, the full, uninhibited one. 11. How she falls asleep on the couch with a book on her chest within 10 minutes of starting a movie after 9 p.m. This was our running joke. I always insisted I could stay awake. He would just smile, grab a blanket, and let me drift off. I saw it as me being a boring movie partner. He saw it as a moment of peace that made him smile. 12th. Her fierce loyalty to her friends. 13. The ridiculous number of mugs she owns and how she insists on using a different one every day. 14. That she still believes in sending handwritten thank you notes. 15th. Her strength, especially when she thinks she doesn't have any. This last one broke me. I let out a sob, a raw, ragged sound that echoed in the quiet room. He wrote this. He saw strength in me, even when I was at my lowest point, during the months I was unemployed and felt like a complete and utter failure. While I was seeing myself as a burden, he was seeing me as strong. While I was craving grand declarations to prove my worth, he was quietly chronicling the 1,000 tiny reasons I was already worthy in his eyes. All the moments of misunderstanding, all the times I had projected my own fears onto his quiet nature, replayed in my mind, but this time through his eyes. His exhaustion at our anniversary dinner wasn't boredom. It was the fatigue of a man working himself to the bone for our future, who would have been just as happy with pizza on the couch, as long as he was with me. His silence wasn't a withdrawal of affection, it was his way of processing the world. He wasn't a man of grand pronouncements, but of quiet observation and steady, consistent acts of love. I sat there for I don't know how long, the tears streaming down my face, clutching that piece of paper like a holy relic. It was a dictionary, a translation guide to the language of his love, a language I had been failing to understand for years. The sound of the front door opening jolted me back to the present. I hastily wiped my eyes as I heard his footsteps in the hall. He appeared in the doorway of the study, his arms full of grocery bags, a confused look on his face when he saw me in his chair, the crumpled paper in my hand. He put the bags down slowly, his eyes fixed on the list. A faint blush rose on his cheeks. "Oh," he said softly. "You weren't supposed to see that." "Why not?" I asked, my voice thick and trembling. He ran a hand through his hair, looking slightly embarrassed. "I don't know, it's just a silly little thing I do. I started it a long time ago, during that really stressful period at work. Things were tough, and it helped me to focus on what was good, to remind myself." He paused, looking at me with an earnestness that made my heart ache. "It helped me remember you." "It's not silly," I whispered, standing up and walking towards him. "Mark, it's everything." I held out the list and he took it, his fingers brushing against mine. He looked from the paper to my tear-streaked face. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms, and I stepped into them, burying my face in his chest, breathing in the familiar, comforting essence of him. He held me tightly, his hand stroking my hair. In that embrace, I didn't feel the need for any grand words. The list had said it all. The proof of his love wasn't in flowery speeches or expensive gifts. It was in the quiet moments of our shared life. It was in the pantry next to the dark chocolate. It was in the sound of my humming, the sight of my happy dance. It was in his steady, unwavering gaze, a gaze I had so often mistaken for indifference, but which I now understood was pure, unadulterated adoration. I had been so busy searching for a love story written in fireworks that I had missed the masterpiece being written in the quiet, gentle prose of every single day.